Hello y'all, welcome or welcome back to Case Can Probably Read. My name is Casey and your name is probably something awesome like Scheherazade or Methuselah or Baxter. And with almost no segue, let's go ahead and talk about the books that I read this week. I read 4 books this week, the first of which was Never Have I Ever Submitted to My Enemy by Willow Dixon. This is the second book in the Never Have I Ever series by Willow Dixon. Last week I talked about the Never Have I Ever Punched My Roommate's V card. And this book is the follow-up to that one. One thing that I forgot to mention about the last one, the Never Have I Ever Punched My Roommate's V card, is that it does contain a little bit of light kink, I guess. In for a penny, in for a pound, kink is present in this series, which it wasn't something that I really thought of to mention after the first book because it was pretty light in that book, but it was heavier in this second one. Obviously, you can probably tell because the title contains the word submitted, and that kind of means what you think it means. Like I said last time, this is kind of a college romance series. It looks like each one of the books, of which there are 4, follow a different roommate in this particular share house that's close to a college campus. And so this one follows one of the roommates whose name is Alex. He is the best friend of one of the main characters from the first story. This is an enemies to lovers romance. He becomes partnered with this other guy named Kai in one of his classes. They're partnered for a project, and they apparently have some history that makes Alex in particular not really like Kai, and so they don't really get along at first, but of course that changes over time. I did like the first one. I think that I need to preface it by saying, what's the best way to say this? There are some series that I read because I'm in the mood or I'm craving a specific type of book. What this particular series was feeding for me was kind of a craving for college romance or new adult romance, because there's a lot of interesting nuances and tropes that come along with new adult romances. You know, they're figuring their lives out, they're learning how to be independent, they're learning who they are and standing on their own feet for the first time, and sometimes that means standing up to certain authority figures in their lives and deciding what they're gonna do for the rest of their life, discovering certain passions. And I was just kind of in the mood for stories like that, which is kind of why I started reading this series. And I think that is present here. I am not intending to kink shame at all. I just am rarely in the mood to read about kink. I have read some and I did enjoy some of those books, but as far as picking out a story, I don't mind it sometimes, but it's not a feature that necessarily draws me to these books. And that is why the first in this series was something that I was pleasant. I kind of went with it because it was very light in that book, but it did get significantly heavier in the second book. And again, in no way am I meaning to kink shame at all. I'm just saying that as far as reading material goes, these particular kinks and this particular discussion is just not my particular cup of tea. It's not the type of story that I wanted to read. I do think that if you like college romance and you like romance, that this would still be a good choice. Just be aware there is kink present, and the author is very clear about that, actually. I think I was just surprised because it was so much lighter in the first book than it was in the second book. And so I wasn't expecting it as much, but the author was very clear and upfront about that. So, good book, maybe not my cup of tea, might finish. Already said entirely too much about it. Moving on, the next two books that I read were kind of companion novels. It's a series sort of, but they run alongside each other. They're not in sequential order. They're not in chronological order. They happen simultaneously. God, I gotta get better at talking. I read Not That Complicated and Not That Impossible, which are both by Isabel Murray. And Isabel Murray, how did I not know that you existed in this world? Because these are fantastic. Both of these books are set in the Cotswolds. The first one, Not That Complicated, follows a guy named Ray, who is a graphic designer. He lives in a tiny village called Chipping Fairford. He has this cottage that he's bought. He bought it to live in with his boyfriend, who the relationship did not last. They broke up recently due to infidelity, so he's got a bit of a broken heart. And then when he starts a home improvement project in his home, he accidentally finds a corpse under the floor of his bedroom. So, of course, this leads to a lot of shock and horror on his own part, but also in a crazy turn of events, it leads him to get into contact with the man who his former boyfriend cheated on him with. And there's a lot of miscommunication, but it's fun miscommunication. It's not necessarily annoying miscommunication. These two are kind of shoved together. Romance ensues, but it takes some time to get off the ground all the way. I found this book to be absolutely delightful. It was funny and warm and not what you expected. Full disclosure, and I think the author makes that clear, this isn't really a whodunit. How the body made it under the floorboards is never actually explained. So don't come into this book thinking that this is going to be like a Scooby-Doo mystery solve, because that's not what happens. It's mostly about just the chaos that is created by the finding of this body and how it disrupts Ray's life, but perhaps for the better. The second one in the series is called Not That Impossible, and it follows another couple in Chipping Fairford. One of the members of that couple is Jasper Conley, who is a personal trainer, but he is desperately trying to be a journalist, and so he keeps writing stories for the local paper. The other member of this couple in the second book is Detective Chief Inspector Liam Nash, who was the policeman who was kind of in charge of the case of finding the body in Ray's house in the first book. I think the interesting thing about this book is this does not, like I said before, it doesn't come after the first story. It's happening alongside the first story. So as you see Adam and Ray in the first book bumping their way around in order to get to each other and making mistakes, you're seeing that through the lens of a different couple's eyes as they also bump their way around it and find their way to each other, which was kind of neat. You got to see it from a different vantage point. It added another layer of emotion and heart warmth to the story. I had never ever read Isabel Murray, and nor had I heard of her. I just kind of stumbled upon these books and I liked the look of the covers, and so I thought, why not? And now I want to read everything that Isabel Murray has ever written. So I have one of her books that is in my lineup that I will probably read soon, but I'm kind of saving it for a treat because I so thoroughly enjoyed it. Like I said, Isabel Murray, wherever you are, I don't know how I have not heard of you, but you are fantastic. And I loved these books. I loved them. It's just that really great feeling of when you're reading, you all of a sudden come across this absolutely unexpected treasure of a book. And I got 2 of them right in a row. It was just such a wonderful surprise. A wonderful surprise. So, yeah, good books. And the last book that I read this week was Sinner's Gin, which is by Rhys Ford, and it is the first one in a series. This was the last book that I read that to go towards the Asian Readathon challenges. The book starts out with a scene where we're following this band called Sinner's Gin. They're in a limo and they've just won, I think, a Grammy when this giant car wreck happens. And according to what happens in the beginning of the book, everybody in the band is killed in this car wreck except for the lead singer, whose name is Mickey St. John. And so he survives this car accident, but he loses all the other members of his band, including his best friend, who was the lead guitarist. He's living by himself in San Francisco in this big refurbished warehouse. Across from Mickey's home in this warehouse is an artist's co-op, and a cop named Kane Morgan has rented a space there to do woodworking in his free time as a hobby. Well, long story short, Kane accidentally discovers a dead body in Mickey's garage. So naturally, Mickey gets pulled into this whole murder investigation because it turns out that he knows the deceased. So the book is about that investigation, but it's also about Mickey and Kane's relationship. And I don't want to say too much because I don't want to give it away, because I have started reading the second one and there's a pretty big plot twist that happens at the very end of the first book that leads into the second book. For me, it was a pretty neat plot twist. I thought it was cool. I'm trying to think of the best way to describe why I liked this book and then how I felt about this book. I liked the mystery, and I also just really like the way that the author writes. I like their voice. A lot of the metaphors and the kind of imagery that the author used was pleasant. It led into the experience while still being artful and unique. I liked the writing style. I liked the plot. I liked the dialogue. I don't want to say this is a thing that I didn't like. I just think it's a thing that people should be aware of going in. And that's that these are pretty heavy books, kind of dark in subject matter. The descriptions of death and decay doesn't leave a lot to the imagination. The first book did talk about past sexual assault that one of the characters went through. It doesn't really describe it in detail or anything like that, but there are allusions to it and kind of vague descriptions of it. I finished that one, and I am currently reading the second one in that series called Whiskey and Rye. I think there's 6 or 7 books in the series. And so far, I'm really interested to keep going in it. Anyways, that's all I got for you today. We are almost out of May. We're almost done. So I'm probably going to be putting up a wrap up for Asian Readathon just to go over those books and those prompts. And then I'll probably, instead of putting up a weekly wrap up for the last week of May, I'll probably just do a May wrap up, a monthly wrap up, and then talk about the last few books that I read. So that's the plan. As always, if my brand of awkward appeals to you, please feel free to like this video, subscribe to my channel, or follow me on social media, which I will list below. And until next time, see how many times you can fit the word kink into an everyday conversation, because it's uncomfortable. Bye.